Hello and welcome to The Print. On Wednesday, the government withdrew its mandate with regard to the Sanchar Saathi app. It's a state owned cyber safety app, as we know. It was started by the government saying that it was meant to provide cyber security to people. So, for example, it allows users to block and track lost or stolen mobile phones to block using the device's IMEI, and also helps users to report suspected fraudulent calls and verify the authenticity of used devices before purchase. But ever since the app was brought in and the mandate was rolled out, the mandate being that it required smartphone makers to preload this app on all new devices, among other things, there was an outcry over fears of government snooping. Privacy advocates also raised concerns over how the app may impact users' rights. Now, what were these concerns and what are some of the challenges that still remain? To unpack all of this, I have with me Apar Gupta, who's the founder director of the Internet Freedom Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Apar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Apart to start off with, the mandate was issued under the Telecommunications Telecom Cybersecurity Rules 2024, and the government cited telecom cybersecurity and the need to curb counterfeit devices as the rationale, as we know. Let's start with the beginning. What does this app do, and how does it promise, or at least say that it intends to curb or provide cyber safety?
So the Sanchar Saathi application, we have to first also know that and consider that it exists as a website. So it's not as if you need to install the app on your smartphone, then you can check the features. You can simply go on Sanchar Saathi's website, which is there, and the same functionality is available there. And it's essentially an application which has a bundle of applications for firstly getting to know whether the mobile phone which you're using, which is a smartphone, has a duplicate or spoofed what is called a IMEI number, International Mobile Equipment Identity Number, which is a 15-digit code to make sure that the device which you're using is something which is not being repurposed from a theft. It can provide you functionalities also for registering theft of a mobile phone, checking if your name is registered against multiple mobile numbers, things such as that. So the Sanchar Saathi app is a cybersecurity app. It may help in curbing fraudulent cyber thefts, which are also happening, digital arrests, which are also happening, securing all of our interests. But the means which are being used to achieve it are disproportionate, and we'll get into it a little more as we examine the government directive for installing this application.
Tell me a bit about these means before we go to, say, Puttaswamy judgment and the three-prong test and all that. Tell us about this directive and the fear about this not being a choice, initially at least. Now the directive has been rolled back, but tell us about that.
So the first thing which needs to be understood is that the directive was not disclosed publicly. It was leaked through, firstly, a Reuters report, which reported on the directive, and then its text itself came out in the public domain, but the government till now has not proactively published this directive. There are press releases which exist around it. And here, looking at the actual directive is important because its language, and a lot turns on the specific language which is used, its interpretation which is there, to consider if the government was requiring smartphone manufacturers to mandatorily install a government application every time you purchase a device, or if there is a software update and the Google software update or the Apple software update needed to also contain this application as a mandatory installation on your smartphone. So this is why it's important, firstly, for transparency to be there, for a public consultation process to be there. So there needs to be, so there's a high amount of citizen trust in what the government is doing, even if it is for a stated goal of making sure your cybersecurity is taken into account. The second thing about this directive is, after press reports came into existence, what has still not been disputed is that the government was requiring each smartphone manufacturer as well as an operating system to have on a smartphone the Sanchar Saathi app mandatorily installed. So it's not as if the government has walked away from saying that it was requiring smartphone manufacturers to do this. So imagine this is a government power which is being exercised for the first time, where the government is saying that for every smartphone which is sold, an application which is made by the government needs to be there on your smartphone. And the problem with that is the smartphone in many ways is a central repository of your personal and private lives. It's a device which touches upon the most innate aspects of your daily existence: financial, personal, relationships. How do you feel? What kind of things do you do through the day? And to have a government app there without a clear basis in law, what is being done is a tremendous expansion of state power, which is usually not permitted in a democracy. So this was the directive. It was requiring the Sanchar Saathi app to be installed on a smartphone as a mandatory install. Now, there was some language also in this directive that the app cannot be disabled, and this was interpreted both by the Reuters report as well as by us at the Internet Freedom Foundation, that the app will be installed in such a way that you cannot uninstall it. And there are some applications in your smartphone, for instance, the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store or the clock functionality, which are part of the operating system, right? And you cannot uninstall those applications. So just like that, Cyber Saathi could also not be disabled or removed. And this is what the government has walked away from and said that we never wanted to do this. Now the government has taken back this directive as well. So neither the mandatory install nor is the Sanchar Saathi app disabling issue any longer. It's moot.
Right. But if we look at it from the privacy lens, I know the issue is moot now, but if we look at the Puttaswamy judgment, it had laid down a three-pronged test. It was about legality, they spoke about proportionality, and about necessity. If such a mandate is generally, if such a mandate is tested as against these three tests, would it stand?
See, if the Puttaswamy judgment of 2017, which reaffirmed the fundamental right to privacy, is considered, each time the government brings in any kind of policy measure, intervention, or even a law or a direction which encroaches on any person's individual privacy, three things are required. The first is that it needs to be grounded in law. Very clearly, it needs to be grounded in law. It just can't be a direction under statute, which generally mentions the phrase to achieve cyber security. And even if we presume that such a power does exist and that law, and it's clearly there, you also have to do it in a way which is reasonable, which is the most proportionate to the means which are sought to be achieved. And if the impact on your privacy can be then mitigated in some way, the same thing can be done in a way without, let's say, the government mandatorily requiring an application to be installed, which will have a whole set of device permissions. It can be updated anytime. Then there is a problem, right? Because Sanchar Saathi also exists as a website. People can, at the same point in time, also report IMEI frauds for blocking or stealing lost mobiles by going to a police station. There are also other digital platforms and services you can use, which are being made available by the Ministry of Home Affairs for any kind of cyber crimes which are there. So it is not as if the government needed to install. This was the only way you could fix the menace of rampant cybercrime in India, by requiring every smartphone to have Sanchar Saathi installed. So less intrusive alternatives already exist, and the government should have instead relied on them. So according to me, this fails the Puttaswamy test because it is disproportionate, despite the state action having some grounding in law. And I can dispute that as well, because nowhere does the Telecommunications Act or even the cybersecurity rules authorize the Department of Telecommunications to issue a direction for the installation of an application to smartphone manufacturers which cannot be disabled and cannot be removed. And there's a real possibility also that Sanchar Saathi is later used for much more expansive purposes. We know that every app updates over a period of time, right? So what
Right.
if more functionality is added to Sanchar Saathi app? And this becomes troubling because there is no clear grounding for the Sanchar Saathi app in the telecommunications cybersecurity rules of 2024. So when the phrase cybersecurity itself is not clearly defined, each and everything can be an act of cybersecurity, and it can take more and more device permissions, which may potentially even include reading your messages on your messaging applications, which is client-side scanning. And this would break into then anything which is even encrypted by WhatsApp, Signal, any applications does not matter. It's an act of mass surveillance.
So when we talk about, I mean, apart from privacy concerns, is function creep also a concern where data collected for one person may eventually be used for something else? Was that a concern with Sanchar Saathi as well?
See, Sanchar Saathi has this concern which is not only limited to Sanchar Saathi, because there's been a huge amount of public interest also around how our data is being gathered, and the government's response has been, well, we have a data protection law. It will come into effect gradually, and all private sector gathering of your personal data by big technology companies, but also by government departments, will be regulated by it. So you will be placed in control as to your data, and there will be a need for people to take your consent when they're gathering your data. You can check on how your data is being used, and you can ask for its deletion. According to me, this is a myth, because if you look at the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, there are provisions which provide the power to the union government to exempt any department, any activity from the application of provisions of the data protection law, which includes this protection of consent, which obviously will require you to know why your data is being gathered, and thereby your ability to say yes or no, your autonomy, right? So that power which exists under the Data Protection Act with the central government and can be exercised very easily will be exercised at a later point in time. And let us imagine that even if the Department of Telecommunications or the Cyber Saathi application is not exempted, they still needed to take your consent. Okay. Let's also disregard that the directive said that, okay, the directive does not hold any longer. You yourself today, after this podcast, are curious, you go to the App Store and you download Cyber Saathi. Your data, which is being gathered by the government under the Digital Data Protection Act, also not only due to the exemption which is there, but also due to the sharing provisions. When the government gathers data from one service, it can share it with another service. These enabling provisions are there. So potentially all the information about you from one database gets to another database and then is consolidated together. And it can be used for any purpose. This is why I think that there's such a high amount of public alarm around that the government's intentions, even if maybe the best, its actions are not really matching its intentions. People are feeling a higher amount of coercion, lack of choice, and almost like they are being forced to do things in which there's a greater amount of oversight over them, that they are being presumed to be criminals, potentially doing something illegal under the guise of things which are requiring more and more of their personal data in order to establish that, hey, we are bona fide citizens, we are not doing anything wrong.
So Sanchar Saathi seems like just a part of a bigger problem with regard to the already existing provisions that there are. Do you think it would have set a bad precedent as well if the mandate wasn't taken back, leading to more such apps maybe proliferating, the boundaries being pushed generally?
Yes, definitely. And I think so. It's a good thing that, as per a Press Information Bureau release, the Department of Telecommunications has taken back this directive for mandatorily installing Sanchar Saathi. However, Apoorva, that directive has not been made public. Neither has the Department of Telecom release the initial directive or the rollback to it. So we don't know those official government directives which have gone out to smartphone manufacturers. And this is a problem, especially given that its impact is on smartphone users, right?
Yeah.
And secondly, just on the larger issue, just look at one popular public deployment such as Digi Yatra has such a large and visible issue in which there was an absence of consent and people were tricked into enrolling. There are gates which are preferentially there at every airport from gates 1 to 4, which are reserved for Digi Yatra. And a lot of people not everyone has a smartphone, right, who travels by an airplane. And not everyone who has a smartphone wants to sign up to Digi Yatra as well. And finally, just look at the case which has been ongoing, and I think the print has covered it, in which a former vendor which built out the Digiyatra software and the Digiyatra technical ecosystem is fighting with it over intellectual property, because Digiyatra is a private corporation which is supported by the Airports Authority, by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, but it's still a private authority owned by the private airports. So this is a big problem. Where is our data going? Who is gathering our data, and are people really in control? And I think so this entire controversy around Sanchar Saathi epitomizes it. It is a good precedent that the government has taken it back, but it needs to do a public consultation, ideally before it launches any such mandatory coercive digital interventions. These kind of public consultations need to be done in line with the pre-legislative consultation policy. There should be actual consultations. There should be actual receipt of advice. There should be also a rollback if the government thinks that a digital intervention in a certain way harms a person's privacy or is not really achieving the kind of benefit it is promising. So I think so there's a greater degree for democratic deliberation, as much as the state wants these kind of technocratic interventions to check large social problems such as a rise in cybercrime, cyber theft, cyber fraud.
You began this. I'll just ask one more question. You began this interview with saying that Sanchar Saathi app may curb cyber fraud. And now that's what the government was saying. It was trying to highlight cyber crime, and it is a very real concern. You did touch upon it in one of your answers, but still, for our viewers, if you could elaborate a bit on the actual steps that can be taken, which may not be as intrusive as this app, to curb cyber crime and for cyber safety.
So I'm no expert on the practical steps people can take for ensuring that they are not victims of cybercrime, and cybercrime is a very big thing. But let me just try to be a little much more useful for the people who have just borne with my opinion and commentary till now, what I do in my own life, and may not be applicable. The first is to keep separate bank accounts. The first bank account is your transactional bank account, which touches upon UPI and other digital services or card mandates, which has a very low amount of sums which do not include your long-term savings and investments. You need to separate that into another account, which ideally is not shared that widely, does not have those mandates and digital payment systems built into it. So that's one thing you can do financially. And with respect to cybersecurity, especially for women and vulnerable people, they need to assess, and through a threat assessment, including using password managers, using two-factor authentications, which I know sometimes cause a little bit of delay, a little bit of device management, but it's worth it in the long term. Use 2FAs always for all device sign-in. So if you do these two basic things, I think so to a large extent, you would be cyber safe. But there are guides as well which exist on the internet. This is something people need to educate about themselves more about, and there are a lot of educational resources which are available online. I would recommend you look them up.
Those are some very practical suggestions. I'm sure they will be helpful to our viewers. And with this, we've reached the end of this interview. Thank you so much for this, Apar, for sharing your insights with us. And thank you to all our viewers watching. Do let us know in the comment section what you thought about this interview, and do follow us on social media.